Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 153rd of Kouryer podcast. Good morning, Montreal. I know it's 10 a.m. there over there, probably like 10 a.m. or something. And I hope you're all having a fantastic day. And well, with that being said, let's get into the introduction. Our today's guest is Mr. Nate Rudichuk. He is the concrete overlord and also the concept artist working at Eidos from Montreal, Canada. Now, with that quick introduction out of the way, let me just quickly mention something. As you're probably like seeing in the video format of the podcast, or probably listening on the audio versions, you see that there's a lot of changes, and there's like the whole format of the podcast has been revamped. And basically, what you need to know is always look out for the stories on the Instagram podcast page, because I ask a lot of questions there. I announce the guests that are going to come on the podcast. And also, all the uploads from now on are going to be on Mondays and Fridays. And with that being said, I also have a lot of free time to make more extra content out of the previous episodes. So, check out and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. And also, on the contact section in the captions, you can see the Instagram and art station, and also the Instagram of the Chido app. And what is Chido app, you might ask? Well, stay tuned, and you're going to learn more about it in the podcast. And well, how was the introduction?
Man, I love it. It's perfect. How's it going? So everything that he said was 100% true. And by the way, the Concrete Overlord is a self-titled thing that I made. So I don't know if anybody else besides you calls me that, but I'd like to think so.
Yeah,
I hope so at least.
All right. So speaking of concrete overlord, you seem to really like brutal architecture, right? Brutalism and concrete. Yeah, no, I do. I grew up. My father is a land developer, so I kind of always grew up around construction and building. When I was a kid, I used to run around on construction sites or, at sales centers, and I would learn about the construction process and architecture. And I get to meet all these people that talk about how a building is made. And I'm talking anywhere from a small home, like a single family home, to large condo towers, big buildings. And you learn some of this stuff, and it's fascinating. And I think that was always kind of in my childhood, and it influenced a lot of how I want to approach the work. I love concrete because it's probably one of the most versatile forms of building material you can get. Besides glass, really it's sculptural. You can make whatever you want out of it. And I love how nature interacts with that, especially look at some of those old concrete buildings and, the post-Soviet states, and how the weather has affected, the texture or the material or it degrades it. I love that feeling of man kind of interacting with and commanding shape in nature. So that's why concrete has always been something that's spoken to me, I guess, and something I try to highlight in the work. That's interesting, and there's certain types of aesthetics in art, and that I personally really like myself. Not just art. I could say art, because these niches also exist in photography and other art forms as well. It's not just about like digital art or just the thing that we like concept art and stuff like that. Like one of them is brutalism. Basically, one of the main first things that I learned from architecture was brutal architecture from the subgenres of it. Because in my hometown Shiraz in Iran, there's a lot of buildings from 56 years ago constructed by German engineers. Like one of them is the buildings of the main buildings of the Shiraz University. They're all in pure brutal architecture. And I'm gonna actually, in the video sequence that you're watching from his work, I'm gonna add a couple of pictures of that for people to see what we're talking about.
That'd be great.
Basically the facade of Shiraz buildings. And another thing after a while that I start to really like is brutal architecture that's been abandoned and destroyed, but it's been overgrown by nature. That kind of aesthetic, I love that. And there's even apparently a subgenre kind of related to it called solar punk. Have you heard about it?
Yeah. There's a few artists that I kind of semi-follow that have been making a lot of work about that. But
What is it, mostly like abandoned buildings with overgrown stuff, or it's like a lot of green-esque buildings where there's solar panels everywhere and there's a lot of photosynthesis and like light as a subject matter. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically it's about solar punk in a nutshell is about like, the genre of post-apocalyptic, but it's a kind of a future and post-apocalyptic that the inevitable bad stuff hasn't happened and humanity has overcome all this like, evil challenges and have learned to sustainably progress the technology and also keeping up with nature and not destroying it. And basically it's a harmonious kind of like, future, like utopian future. That's basically in the gist of solar punk.
Optimistic. I like that. That's not something I would necessarily describe my work to be, but I actually like the optimism of some of that attitude. Yeah, it's like the opposite. It's like the opposite of what I do, right? Where it's like instead of mega cities that are depressing and nobody really wants to live there. It's like the world's over, but hey guys, we can rebuild, and it's nice. Hey, at least there's flowers, right?
Yeah, awesome. And the thing that I'm really into is actually a different subgenre that I kind of seen really less works from it. It's basically imagine a post-apocalyptic bad future, like, event that happened, but there's a group of humanities that survived and are trying to make this world a little bit prettier and with flowers and plants and colorful stuff. Like a really like, small example I could say, I've been kind of, coincidentally like mentioning this topic like for a couple of episodes past, but in the end of Wall-E, the animation Wall-E.
Yep, of course.
In the end, when the humans come back, there's like a desolate, dusty world. But then the plant that Wall-E tried to save has survived, and it's now everywhere. It's growing everywhere, and it's like a beautiful kind of scenery, like kind of poetic scenery in a sense. And that's the kind of aesthetic I personally really love.
Interesting. Yeah, that's cool though. There definitely really is not a lot of that. I think there's one artist that I can't think of right now that's kind of gotten famous or at least known in the art world for that. I'll see if I can find the name later, but they make quite a lot of interesting work. I've seen a few examples of that, but yeah, really there hasn't been very much coming out. I think right now we're still on the sci-fi kick where everybody's making like gigantic, either like a cyberpunk megacity, or there's some sort of like weird, shapely sci-fi futuristic building that kind of looks like a spider web almost. That I've seen a lot of those kind of come out, but I have yet to see the ArtStation trend of solar punk.
Yeah, I mean, there's like it's a quite like a niche kind of genre. It's not, I don't think, as appealing to most people as like as you said, like those kind of cyberpunk-esque kind of scenes. Like it has a small niche but a really strong cult following, and it's super interesting, especially on Pinterest. If you go look at my pins and collection on Pinterest, it's mostly that. It's mostly like solar punk and that kind of stuff. And speaking of like about a lot of brutal architecture, solar punk, and all our tastes and aesthetics combined, I want to ask you something else that I try to summarize it in just one question. Basically, could you give us like an introduction and how you got into the world of visual arts? Basically, that moment you realized that, oh, I want to become an artist for life. And also tell us how we got into, in continuation to that, also tell us the story of how we got into concept art and environment art.
Sure. So I was always an artistic kid. I used to sell comic books that I made in grade school. So I'd be, 10 years old running around with like these comic books that I printed, and I would sell copies to people on the schoolyard with my friends. We would have like a little side business. So I was always kind of wanting to do something like that. I was making cartoons for a while, and when I was growing up, I really wanted to be a cartoonist and then an architect and kind of some sort of something involving drafting to some degree. Then when I was in high school, I ended up kind of drifting towards music. So I was in a metal band for a while. I was doing that. I think I got moderately okay at playing guitar, which is what I started with. And then somewhere around maybe 16, 17, I was kind of getting sick of that trajectory. And I remember very distinctly actually talking to my cousin who worked for, I think he worked for Disney at the time. Anyways, he was in California working in the game industry. He was doing some stuff. He knew all the guys from, Respawn and Treyarch, like all the Call of Duty guys, and tons of connections in the game world. And I remember talking to him about some of the issues that I was having with regards to my career choice. And, basically I said, I asked him, I said, is there a world where I can make money drawing guns and like spaceships? And he's like, actually, yeah, you can make a lot of money doing that. That's just a career path. Have you heard of concept art? And so I was like, no, I've never, I don't know what this is. And he says, if you play video games. And I was, of course, what 14-year-old kid or whatever, 16-year-old kid doesn't play video games, right? And he said, there's guys that have to draw this stuff and design it. And then that kind of was it for me. I immediately started looking into it, and I just couldn't stop. So I remember being, 17 and asking my dad to go half and half with me on a Wacom tablet, trying to get my Photoshop skills up, and trying to learn all this stuff and figure out how they would do it. And then I went to art school for a while, so I was studying design, and then I was studying game design after that. And I ended up just getting in that way. It kind of was just at about 16, 17, it was just, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to do. And then keep going until I get there, I guess. It was the attitude at the time.
That's so awesome that you kind of realized that, early on. Usually there's a certain type of cliches and stereotypes that happen for artists, that how they become artists. A lot of them are like, well, I used to draw from childhood, and then this happened. This is pretty straightforward. But for a lot of people, especially from countries that are kind of economically set, they usually go to the medical route or engineering route. Then they realize, oh shit, this is so soulless for me. I don't like to do this. Why did I listen to my parents or let the society and my teachers tell me what to do? But it's so actually awesome that you kind of got it early on. And actually, as time goes by, the gap of starting and getting to professional level is getting much more smaller, not just in art and everything. I had artists who was like Yunus Seyfan. He's an Iranian concept artist. He's 18 now, and he's just working professionally as an artist, concept artist.
Yeah,
or there was
great.
Another one Andrew Price had on his podcast. There was this 16-year-old teenager called Ludwig something. I forgot his name, but basically he's right now, he started Blender when he was 12 and a half, and at 15 he started taking professional commission, and his work is actually pretty solid. And right now I'm actually funny enough, I'm actually in the middle of Andrew Price Donuts tutorial, and he is already a pro at. I'm not actually making this as a joke, this is legit. Basically the gap is getting much, because it's actually a really good age that we're living for becoming an artist. Everything is available, every resource is ready to be used. You can pirate softwares now. Whoops, I didn't say that. Yeah. No, I actually said that.
Yeah, nobody's
I'm not sponsored.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. And
well, you know what though, that is true. But I will say that I think it's tough. It's tough when you look at it from a economics perspective, because art really is something that's so unstable. Big picture, it's very unstable. You get a job as a doctor. There's always going to be a need for doctors or whatever, or nurses or engineers or politicians. But I think that there's this concept where, and it is going away, but there's this concept, I think, especially in older generations that aren't familiar with these industries, that hey, you're an artist, so basically you're unemployed. When you tell your girlfriend's parents, I'm a professional artist, they go, so you have no money. You know what I mean? And that's no longer really the case. But it's a different mindset, because I think what's going to happen now worldwide, and it's already beginning to happen, is there seems to be kind of a more of a set and more institutionalized pipeline from artist to concept artist for gaming and movies, right? Before, when it was, maybe 10 years ago, really it was like if you were the first guy to do photo bashing, I mean, that was a revolutionary thing. People were going, how did you do that, right? Or some of the first guys to incorporate 3D modeling with concept art. Like, nobody was doing that, and nobody understood why that was important until it was. And so now that there's kind of more established pipelines and there's time to see how different artists will take those approaches and make different work, I think there's kind of there's more of a traditional kind of role. And you see schools popping up now that teach people how to make concept art, or there's different kinds of programs. But the real exciting thing is where that goes next. You get people that are familiar with, let's say, game design and concept art and gaming, and they can take that creativity and monetize it elsewhere. So what I'm really excited about is seeing the young guys who take this traditional skill and then start reapplying it into other industries. Like, what does advertising look like if they got concept artists on board? Or what is spatial design? Maybe there's architects that get concept artists to help imagine different things. You know what I mean? Maybe companies start hiring these guys for presentation and for visual communication. You just never know where this goes, but I think that this is like a burgeoning industry. Ultimately, there's so much more potential besides just making video games as we know them today, and that's really where I see like the pivot happening. What's possible with these skills is open, right? It's wide open.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, as you know, like the origins, if I'm not wrong, the origins of concept art was from the cinema industry, right? Like the film and movie industry.
Sure.
But here's the thing: even right now, a lot of like places like use concept artists for a lot of advertising agencies are actually hiring concept artists for their commercials. I mean, as you said, like even I would even suggest even clothing companies will try to incorporate this kind of tactics, because imagine, for example, Nike or Adidas trying to like make a teaser for like a new line of shoe they're going to drop. Like, there's so much potential, as you said.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, because it really is. I think it's knocking off a lot of previous professions. So, draftsmen, for example, for architects, that's changed to CAD guys. So now they're CAD artists that are making architectural drawings, and that might change to 3D modelers who are now doing that. So, architects is one vertical. They're trying to learn how to integrate 3D pipelines, but maybe there's a lot of things like editorial artists or sketch artists for newspapers, tons of stuff that are not really seen as exciting or like new or technologically savvy professions could get folded into just concept art in general, because really it's the same skill set. It's just a matter of what you're making art for. And so that's where I see it getting really exciting is the guys who are ahead of this technology, or who are able to market themselves and treat it like a brand and like a product versus just I'm making art for somebody else. They can really make money, or they can really decide what kind of work they want to take on.
Yeah, I mean, I actually recently saw someone on Instagram whose main shtick was basically taking artworks of others and beautifully animating them. Like, by animating, I mean, have you played League of Legends?
Very briefly, like a while ago.
All right, but here's the thing: do you know when you open the menu, there's like a splash screen of a character, and there's elements animated, like it's a beautiful kind of scene. That kind of animation, I mean, and he was like specifically focusing on that, and his work was so good. And I think that going niche on something, like, for example, I don't think there's many people that are like, specifically working on animating like, 2D pieces. Like, he took, Ross Strauss actually shared that he did animated one of the pieces of Ross Strauss, and Ross Strauss shared his piece, and it was actually so cool. If for anyone who's, if you even go on Ross Strauss pages, I think you can see. But I think the main meta, I think, in the coming decade will be a specialization, and specifically a specialization in terms of, for example, let me say, before, like even 10 years ago, like it was very common to get generalists in the industry like faster than now. Right now, everything is a specialist. Like all companies were, for example, you're working on a new game, like $60 million budget, a AAA game, you're going to need a specialist for cars, you need a specialist for tires, you're even going to need a specialist for the dust visual effects, that type of stuff. I think if you want to actually make it to the industry faster, is to become like a geek and a specialist in a specific area. And the best tip I would say is to be a specialist in what you love. I mean, that's kind of cliche, I know, but yeah, I think not being a generalist would be better, I think, for your.
Well, it's true. Yeah, it's true because I mean, first of all, you're going to be spending so much time making this stuff. Like if you become a specialist in anything, you have to just spend hours messing up and learning about it. So can you imagine spending that much time doing something that's boring or that you hate? You have to love it because it's stupid otherwise. It'd be insane to spend that much time doing something that makes you upset. It doesn't make any sense. So it's already nonsensical. But I agree with that. I think the specialization, I mean, just to give us some perspective, I mean, I've gotten so many requests for work based off of the brutal mega cities or like the brutal architecture, and not necessarily just redesigning more of those cities, but people have begun to, maybe about a year ago, people started really messaging me and saying like, I like this style of work. This will influence what I want to work on. Can you do a piece or can we work on a project? You know, I've actually been approached by advertising companies and I've worked with a few of them. You know, I've worked on some Netflix stuff. I've worked on tons of stuff that really likes that specific element of the work that I make. And really the only way I could have done that is if I just really got into the brutal architecture side. And that's what I'm trying to build for myself, at least like in my personal work. I just like that stuff. So I try to focus on that. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely been a net positive, I would say. You know, I made the mistake when I was younger. Well, not the mistake, but I think I tried to design, you know, do a couple spaceships, do a couple guns, do a couple characters, do a couple environments, and be one of those guys that, hey, I can do it all. I'm useful. And I find that it's much cooler to just have your own voice, and people, even if it's not a one-to-one directly applicable piece of work that people might hire you for, they see that you have a direction that you're excited about. And I think that's worth more of a conversation when you're maybe getting hired or when you're looking to build a contract out with somebody else. I think that's worth much more in terms of value than just, I can design a generic spaceship, here you go. Unless spaceships are your thing, people don't need to see that I can do all that stuff. If I know 3D modeling, if I know how to draw and use perspective, they know I can draw anything, really.
And for example, that's actually such a good example that you said spaceships. Like, there are people who, you know, design spaceships really cool in terms of like visually, but then there are people who have a knowledge about a basic amount of knowledge. So when they design it, for example, a spaceship, they take into account, all right, like not just the aesthetic part of it, but also the functionality of that thing. And this is just an example, like a spaceship, even with environments, like those type of artists that actually know a little bit about the science of what they're working on. And I think will stand out more than, you know, people who are just, all right, they have some sort of visual library, they know design theory, and they're just, you know, going at it aesthetic wise. But if you even like try to learn some how should I say, functional aspect of like what you're designing, that'd be awesome as well. Like for example, you're designing a cyberpunk character, you also like realize, all right, should I put his goggle HUD visor like on his face here? Wouldn't that hinder him from like, you know, seeing his peripherals and, you know, in fights or stuff like that? Or it could be a projector, you know, that sort of stuff. Like, you know, if the creativity doesn't just end at, you know, what the color is, what the material is, you know, stuff like that, you know. And I think that's such an important point.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I mean, I think the best example of that, I don't know if you know this artist, Mike Hill, very famous vehicle designer, and I would say just like prop designer generally. So does a lot of hard surface. Like I think he did some stuff for Call of Duty, did some of the Blade Runner props. Mike Hill, very famous guy, at least in the game design world, and he does a lot of talks on that, on learning. I mean, again, he's not a trained engineer, for example, but I think he did a lot of research in engineering and how mechanical engineering works for vehicles, for things like military hardware. And you can tell when an artist is familiar with the knowledge and the ground and is grounded through that, you know, because how they design makes sense. I mean, even though you're suspending reality, there's a way to incorporate how you could potentially design it in real life, and that's really important. So
I think, I mean, I don't know if you've heard this rule before, but there's a rule about the 70-30. 70% of your work or 70% of a design has to be based completely in realistic architecture or realistic real world design. And then 30% is that suspension of disbelief and then taking it to an imaginary state. So you're able to ground people with that 70% where they go like, oh, I could see this being, oh, this is how this would work if I was in this world. And then that 30% is now your creative license to take it and go wherever you want with it. But I think, yeah, a lot of art, I think that's 100% not real or 100% in the imaginary kind of fails to have that grounded feeling. And maybe it's just me, but it's very subtle. It's very subtle. When you see it, you know it. You know what I mean? When you experience it in a film or in a game, you're like, like that makes a lot of sense. I can imagine myself picking that object up and, I would turn the crank to, to do this, or I would push this button, and it makes sense that it would react how it's reacted.
Yeah, definitely. Now we talked about that. I want to ask you something else that's while we're on the subject.
Sure.
How does your design process usually go anytime you want to start working on a new project? Like, given the specific details we talked about.
So I would say it depends on professional or personal work. Professional work is too varied to give an estimate. So what I'll say is personal work wise, what I'll likely do is, I spend some time on Instagram, and I follow a lot of brutalist architecture Instagram pages, for example, or I research a lot into that and like mega projects that are going around the world. I love. There's a channel that kind of gets me inspired to make work called the B1M, and it's just architecture and construction technology videos that talk about different projects that are happening and different big builds. So that kind of always gets me just excited for building. And I would say that what I would start doing is, gathering research. I'd probably have a sketch or an idea in mind. I think about it from a shape perspective. So, because I studied graphic design initially, I think about, what would a giant circle look like if it was 3/4 to the right of the concept of the piece? And I think about it from that perspective, like triangles, squares, and circles. And then I try to think about this work as if I was to turn this into a magazine cover. What would be the most catching if you were staring at it from 20 feet away in an aisle, right? And so when you think about it like that, it's really, the building doesn't matter at that point. It's just about the abstract. And then what I would probably do is then start to find a way to justify those shapes that I made. So whether this has to be a building, or this has to be a mountain, or this has to be some sort of a thing to connect the shapes to make sense, you fill in the detail that way. So I don't really design buildings outside of that. I like to think about it from shapes and from really abstract ways. And then so at that point, I would probably just model it, or make a few sketches and then model it and then paint over those models, and keep doing that until I get to a point that's more detailed, and then render it, so I would have Blender, Fusion, different photo scanned assets. Maybe I would use QShot sometimes, maybe ZBrush. Bring that all in 3D, render that all out, and then do some quick paint over, play with lighting. At that point, it's just a matter of production. But honestly, I think I have a pretty generic way of gathering reference and building stuff. I don't think it's anything that's crazy unique. It's just a matter of thinking about it from the viewer's perspective. If you were to look at this for 5 seconds, how would you consume this information? So, what kind of concrete texture I use or whatever doesn't really matter. It's more so like, what are the big shapes you're seeing and what's your brain registering is like important. And then if I can figure out a way to get to that perspective, I think then that's a successful piece.
All right. And there's also something else I wanted to ask you personally. Like, in one of your posts from 2019, you kind of mentioned, like, you shared some of your work process actually. And I was wondering, basically in a lot of your environment arts, you 3D model a lot of the assets, especially the main, like, focal point of the composition. Like, for example, if it's a building, if it's a structure, you use 3D modeling, right? Of course. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, what softwares do you use? And not just that, for people who don't really have, like, really strong hardware. Do you have any tips? Like, because here's the thing. I personally work everything on a laptop and I don't have like a workstation. And a lot of times I'm forced to use wireframe mode and, for the whole, rendering and stuff like that. Do you have any tips regarding like getting over that hardware issue?
So I used to work on a trash MacBook, like 2013 Pro, where like the fan every 4 seconds the fan was, you could cook eggs on the laptop. It was that overheated. I mean, it was disgusting. And I was using Keyshot and Blender and ZBrush, and like you put it in and you have to wait for a minute for like the thing to render out before you even got the preview of what you would want to build. And I guess you just develop patience. I think, unfortunately, there is let's just say a barrier to entry where, if you want to work on really heavy scenes, you would need to have hardware that can manage that, or don't do that. So firstly, I would say I work in Blender mostly now. I work in Unreal sometimes. I work in Fusion 360. I'm starting to get into Moy 3D, and I have things like Marvelous Designer and ZBrush that I sometimes use, but really not so much anymore. And I use Daz. So those are my main packages. But I would say Blender is like the majority of the time that I spend modeling now is in Blender. If you're familiar with 3D modeling and optimizing your assets, so like texture optimization and mesh optimization, that will help with performance. But because I'm an artist and I don't care about that, what I did was I just saved up and bought a bunch of 2080 Ti's, and then I just rely on that for my completely garbage topology. So, but when it mattered, and when I didn't have that power to use, what I would probably say is just be very careful with what you're actually rendering and what you're modeling with. So working in wireframe or working in preview mode is one thing, but if all of your textures are 8K and you have 20 million polys in a scene, probably not so good at that point. And so what can you photo bash in, or what can you kind of suggest and then refine later? That's what I would say. But if you can take it all the way in 3D, if you can have a 30, 40 million poly scene and you can have 8K textures and the file can be, 20 gigs and you can run that, then why not? Right? Then go for it. But if not, just recognize what the limitations are and then paint and photo bash.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I guess you could, bake some JPEGs on, as textures,
100%. Well, actually, one of the best. So I don't know if you know who. I mean, probably you would know this, but Ian Hubert, very famous Blender artist. Yeah, everybody knows who he is. So like, he has a really good way of cheating, as he calls it, where you just import a JPEG or whatever as a plane, and then you just start extruding stuff from it. And so like, there's really no textures that you need besides that photo. You don't really need much data. You don't really need normal maps. You don't have to start importing different maps and different bakes, and it can be really messy, and that'll work. And so there's tons of ways where I think if you're a 3D artist trying to make game ready assets and do it that way, it's not going to work. But if you don't mind having like just trash topology and having a scene that is really not usable in anything but art, there's a lot of ways to just cheat. I mean, so many times, like what I'll do is, if I want a cloud, I'll import a transparent model or a transparent PNG of a cloud, and then just have that as a plane, and like you can just move it back and forward in the composition. And instead of having some sort of volumetric rendering, you just have a cloud photo, and like that's enough. Or like if it's a building in the distance, I can maybe just quickly photo bash like photo bash something in Photoshop and import it in, and then make like a cube out of that and project it on. And so there's ways to cheat that. There's ways to cheat it without having to spend the time and spend the energy and spend the CPU power to build everything in the scene properly.
Yeah, definitely. And here's the thing about like Ian Hubert. He like his tutorials are awesome, those 1 minute tutorials. And actually, I think the one the piece of advice that he said you're referring to was from, I think there's a 40-minute YouTube video and presentation of him, like, kind of like in TED, not a TED talk, but I think there was a conference or something, and it was actually like showing like his process of taking a JPEG and extruding like different bits and pieces of it and just bake into it, and boom, done. And like there's one channel that I also recommend everyone. Like, you know, there's two channels that comes in. No, sorry, three. All right, that's enough. Three that I can remember is one is Andrew Price, another one is Ducky 3D, and last but not least, Blender Secrets. Blender Secrets is amazing.
Blender Secrets is amazing. Yeah, that channel is awesome.
Yeah,
no, that's a good one. Blender Secrets is really good. I would say that's a good one. Also, I mean, if you're willing to pay the money, Ian Hubert has a good Patreon tutorial, so you can look at some of his videos. He has some of the assets. So I think when you download some of his assets, if you have a chance to, you can look at how the topology is and how he's made it, and it's really pretty simple. I mean, you can see how he got from the extrude from JPEG to some of those models that he uses in his movies or in his short films, and it makes a lot of sense. At least to me, it made a lot of sense. And there's a way to kind of reverse engineer that with your own work. Like there's a few pieces that I did that I tried to very quickly attempt some form of a short film on my own. I ran out of time, but I spent about a couple months doing like maybe a minute and a half of recorded work that I posted, and just like different city views or whatever, and all that stuff was used the same way Ian Hubert did his style, where you would just start from a JPEG and build a scene out, and it actually worked pretty well. So I would recommend that as like a main thing. And also, photos are the best for textures. You know, don't try to make your own. Just find someone who has a good photo, crop like a little piece of that, and then use that. There's no shame, and that's the best way to do it. And if you like, you know, the way concrete block looks in some Instagram photo, use that block. Why not?
Yeah, here's the thing. I was wondering, there's this idea I have, like, I'm sure it's not the most new and innovative idea, but I was just wondering, for example, in your line of work, you're working with a lot of concrete textures and stuff like that. Could you, for example, like as to make a, for example, Photoshop stamp, you know, that Photoshop stamp where it takes a piece of a JPEG and it just repeats it randomly, kind of? Could you, like, you know, take 5 or 6 different similar, like, you know, from different sources and images and put them next together and just either randomize an algorithm, just meshes all the pixels together and it just becomes a new, like, you know what I mean?
You could do that. I mean, again, this is the thing, is like everybody has their own way. So I think I've never done it that way personally. There's 1,000 ways to get the result that you want to get. And it's just a matter of like how you want to communicate it. So what I like about my technique is I'll do it the old school way, where I'll maybe blend a few textures into each other, or I'm a sucker for, like, if I see something on Google Maps, for example, I might screenshot that for a texture, and then like Street View, and I just screenshot that, and then like make something completely different out of this one little texture that I saw. And so I like things. I like taking things from the real world and then just collaging them in 3D, basically. I don't necessarily like randomizing textures. I kind of like I look for specific things. So, you know, there'll be times where I'll be on Google Earth or whatever, and I see like a concrete rust stain on a highway underpass. And like, this has to be I know exactly where this little thing is going to go in this piece that I'm working on. I know it has to be this. And so instead of randomizing that, I'll just take it, you know, or I'll find something like that. So I like elements. That's how I work anyways, but it might be different for you. So you could use a stamp, but I tend not to paint too much in Photoshop anymore. I tend to try to keep it all in 3D. And then once the texture's kind of established, then just like touch everything up and try to really make it painterly and sexy in Photoshop, but not so much established texture in Photoshop.
Oh yeah, definitely. And because here's the thing, while you were speaking, I also Googled something, and I kind of it was kind of good news for me, because recently one of the like side projects that I have is to get back into Python and start, you know, learning, making plugins for Blender, basically, specifically for my stuff that I like. And I saw there's like a API for Python and Photoshop called PyPy, which actually like you can script for Photoshop with Python. Like you can actually write plugins. And, you know, since as someone who has kind of like an understanding of basically how colors and works, I know a little bit of fundamentals, like, you know, and also I kind of have a background in programming. I like, as a side hobby, when I get bored from art and Blender, I code, you know, basically. And yeah, this is actually a new project I want to do, and I want to as for my first project, I want to do with the cement textures actually, because that's actually a really simple, nice challenge relatively, because they're kind of similar. But yeah, but the vision I have in mind is like, for example, you see it like a cement texture, right? And you have the image, and there's another one, and there's another one, and they're all in kind of the same color temperature, basically. So the thing is, the algorithm I want to write is going to take all those data and color information, and with the set factors that you give it in, it's going to mesh it all together, and you can use it now. Now, what does that mean? Is as soon as you put your brush down on the tablet, it's going to generate the texture out of all those sources. The next little movement that your pen makes, it's going to make a new one. It's going to make a new one. It's going to make a new one. You know, out of all those data, it's going to randomize the, like, basically the pictures and the data. So you always get something new, and like, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I almost wonder if there's a way to develop a pipeline to incorporate that into Blender as well.
Oh, with Blender it's much easier actually. With Blender,
yeah, like already... no, but that idea of like texturing, randomizing textures with concrete, but then having some sort of a pipeline where you can use it for Photoshop and for Blender, because then I think you could or some version of that where you can incorporate the 3D process into it, because then you could start getting interested in generative textures within the 3D software and kind of treat that as like a creative process in and of itself. That could be cool, though. I like that idea. I mean, in general, I think, I you know what? I haven't really seen a lot of, I mean, personally, I could just be completely ignorant, but I haven't really seen a lot of people doing that anyways. I haven't seen a lot of plugins that do it, you know, that I would use. So, but it could be interesting. You know what I mean?
All right, give me 5 months and I'll have it ready.
Yeah, you know what, man? PM me. I'll be your first customer, no problem. You know what I mean? I'll be your first customer, and I'll do a demo video, and I'll introduce it to the guys in Eidos.
Thank you so much, man. But honestly, I mean, not just with the cement texture. Like for example, in hard surface modeling, all right? There's I'm not talking about that kind of clean type of slick hard surface stuff. I'm talking about like those raggedy kind of scruffy kind of hard surface textures. Where there's like a scratches and there's like kind of like a dirt on it. Yeah. There's peeled off like iron bits out of it, and there's like a oxidation bronze like revealing stuff out of it, that type of stuff. You can even randomize that. And here's the thing, with just a little bit of like sliders, you can determine like how much, for example, of that oxidation you want it to be on your generator, or how much you don't want it to be. So basically a bullet, for example, a tank shell hits your, for example, robot or mech, and around that area you can just increase the amount of a scatter of like that oxidation. Then at the end you lessen it. This type of stuff, like with programming, you can do a lot of stuff actually, even in art. It's such a, I think, undervalued. Like it's a vacuum, I think, that not most people.
You're describing tech art, right? At that point, you're getting kind of into tech art.
Yeah.
At least for gaming, that's what we would. I mean, yeah, you're getting really close into the tech art community, which is 100% undervalued. There's not enough people in that. Super useful. But like I said, I think that there's a lot of opportunity. We talked about this earlier, but the whole idea where you can kind of decide what kind of business you want to make with your creativity, and it doesn't have to be, I just make concept art. Like, so getting into programming and, building a product basically that you would want to use as an artist, like that's super useful. And that's an opportunity to maybe branch out into an industry, or to have a product that serves a need, which is important. I think not a lot of artists are doing that right now. But it's great,
Yeah, and speaking of like the business side of the art world, I already mentioned something in the introduction called, where they're gonna talk about Chido. I put a page of it on the Instagram page of it on the captions, and tell us about the story of like what Chido is, like how the idea originated, and where you guys are right now in your pipeline.
Yeah, totally. So. Initially, a friend of mine and a colleague, we were talking about, it started a completely different as it is now, but we're talking about AI for creativity and how you could basically try to understand how virality works within art. So like, what makes a piece go viral on Instagram, or what makes a piece successful when you're trying to communicate visually to somebody else. So, why does a castle that is designed like one way do a lot better to an audience than a castle that's designed another way? And we figure that there's ways to actually break that down into image recognition software, down theoretically, obviously. And so we started to try to build a product and that would work like that. We eventually landed on our first launch, which would have been analyzing social media posts and generating keywords and hashtags and whatever that would help people kind of automate that process. And so that's where we started. So it was a lot of investing into database technology and into language processing and image recognition. So we totally scrapped that maybe about a year ago. And now what we're doing is basically taking that initial technology that we developed, and now we build game levels for things like real estate companies, home builders, and eventually architects and marketing agencies. So what Chido will look like very soon is you're a home builder, you're going to sell a home. If it hasn't been built yet, all you really have is like a pamphlet to give people some renderings and maybe like a floor plan. And so when you're buying a home, like that sucks. You have no idea what it could be like. And so the only answer to that currently is you have a show home. You actually build a house or a unit that people can walk around in, and then you say like, well, if you want different kinds of cabinets, here's what the color could be. We're taking all that and saying, hey, what if you had a software package that people could access online that was basically a game level, photorealistic of the unit that they want to buy. So any home that's going to be built, it's built digitally. We call it digital twins. And you can walk around in it. You can change lighting. You can change materials and experience like what could be a home for you before it's even built. You could have VR, or you can walk around in a showroom in VR, or you could just use it on a desktop or on mobile. So that's like what we're going after right now is that industry. And because I have a lot of connections in the home industry through my family, and then my other business partners are also connected in that, and we all build video games professionally, we figured that there was a market opportunity here to do something different. And again, I talked about this earlier, but taking video games and saying, okay, what else can we build with this kind of technology and this kind of creative energy? What other market, what other industry can we service now that we understand what the value of this really is? And so, we've done a few tests. We've already started working with a few clients, and now we're just touring and basically dealing with home builders around Canada currently. But we plan on expanding quite soon into the US.
Yeah, and I think even the North and Western European market would be also a good target for that, I think.
Totally.
Yeah, and actually I thought initially it was an app that you guys got photo scan, houses that are already built. But when you said it's going to be a really nifty visualization tool of how house is going to look like before it's been built. Now that's I think it's going to be super valuable for the market, and I'm sure especially in countries like China or Singapore and stuff like that, they are super advanced in those stuff, and I'm sure they're working on it as well. But I think the main competitors that's going to win on that niche is going to be I think user UI and UX are super underrated areas that people don't really especially in developers, they don't really look to it. So if you guys just make it way more easy to use or just intuitive in that sense of design, you guys could definitely be on the top. Why not?
Totally. And I mean, when you think about it, it's just a game level, right? So you can call it whatever you want, but it's just a game level that you're building. And then so I think what gets me the most excited is, okay, so you now have this game level of your home. What can you do with it after it's built and after you buy it? So eventually we plan on turning these levels into what you would call the equivalent of a Sims game, where you could drag and drop furniture that you want to buy, and you could kind of treat it as what could my home look like if I want to redecorate? Let me use this model and just throw stuff in and see what it looks like. And so I kind of like that idea of, for the average person who doesn't care or know about art and software, could they spend 30 minutes or 20 minutes redecorating their entire house simply and easily and actually experience it before they buy anything? And I think that's super valuable. It's like the last frontier of creativity. You know, the home's huge. Like we spend so much money on these things, especially in North America. I mean, it's a huge investment, and you really don't have as much freedom to visualize that as you would in, say, fashion or even buying a car or whatever, right? So I think it's an untapped market. We'll see. I mean, you know, we lose all our money or we make some money. Either way, I'm happy to do it. I'm excited about it. It's just fun to work on new tech and see where it goes.
Yeah, awesome. Wish you guys the best. And the thing is, like, even with industries, like, do keep in mind, like, with even industries like fashion industry, like, of course, there are websites that you can, you know, pick, for example, any product and add your design to it, and they will order. But there's a huge problem with this, that most of them, like, for example, let's say t-shirts, a lot of DTG printers, basically direct to garment printers, they only have this type of printers that can only print designs on just like a limited rectangle area on the shirt. So basically what I'm trying to say, there are technological limitations in all of this, like, new tech that we're talking about. There's, like, you can't, for example, make a logo and just put it on here, on, like, for example, on your shoulder, you know, because those printers aren't fit for that. And like, I even in Canada or America, I googled this once. There's not much actual printers that can do those stuff, special stuff, and even with the sneaker design and stuff like that. But for example, for a real estate area that you just talked about, real estate industry, I had another guy on the podcast, Sam King 3D. That's his username on Instagram, and he used to say for a while when he was young, he used to work in ArtWiz, and he's a 3D gaming 3D artist, and he says there was a lot of money in that industry, regardless of, you know, what part you work for it, and there's so much like, you know, potential in it. And about, like, you know, if you guys could just make it like a super user friendly and intuitive, I think you're hit the money on the spot, basically. I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's a lot more that goes, like, one of our partners is an ArcViz trained architect, and then he branched it into ArcViz and more creative stuff in general. But because you're basically just building a video game, there's more that goes into it than just 3D art, which is why I think it's been so hard to do initially for people, is because you need tech art experience, you need rendering experience, you need basically like networking experience in gaming, which all the competitors that exist now just don't have, because they're not game companies. They don't have that in their model. So you're basically getting a bunch of guys who have built, I mean, not to be a humble brag, but you know, one of our co-founders worked for BioWare for a while, worked on some pretty famous AAA titles. You know, we have a lot of other people in our company that work for CD Projekt Red, and they have some pretty big titles behind their under their belt that they've helped develop, and you have people that have that expertise that are coming to a completely new market. I think it's a disruption. You know, it's a disruption for ArcViz guys now who are just kind of getting into game engine technology for their renderings. But when you have someone making a video game out of it, it's a bit different, you know, which is why I'm so excited about it. I think it's like, it's wild. It's a left turn from where I think the industry was. But one of those things that once it's out there, I could have the potential to really change how home builders or architects kind of use software to display ideas, which is really important, I think.
Yeah, and we've talked about, you know, some of your Chido project, and I want to now ask you about, like, you know, the work you did in Eidos Entertainment, and sure. I was wondering for how long have you been, you know, working there? Basically tell us the story of how you got there, for how long you've been doing, and what are some of recent projects you're working on or worked on, if of course there is no NDA involved.
This is the tragic part about being in the industry, man, is that almost everything I've worked on is still under NDA. As you know, game production can take 5 years. I mean, especially if what I've been doing recently at Eidos is mostly what you would call like blue sky kind of. We have something called a green light program, which is basically pre-production. Hey, here's an idea, give us money, to our internal publisher. And so most of the stuff that I've worked on is still under NDA with Eidos, so I really can't talk about it. But I've been working there for two years, just about. Yeah, maybe 2 years in late March. So I started there just when COVID was popping off, at least in North America. Quite literally, I interviewed at the office, and then when I got hired, they were like, all right, everybody's remote. So I only had like 10 minutes to meet everybody and say hi and stick my head in the office, and then bam, 100% remote. But I've been working in Montreal I worked for a company called Behavior Interactive. So they made Dead by Daylight. I worked for them for about a year and a half, maybe, or a year and 3 months. So I've kind of been in the industry in Montreal for 3.5 years in general. Oh. And most of the stuff has been again, NDA, under NDA. So sorry to completely like kill the vibe or kill the buzz, but there's nothing exciting I can talk about without getting sued or fired.
Yeah, no worries at all. And well, we talked about some of your recent stuff, but here's a main question. What was the first commission or basically paycheck you ever got out of art? What was it for? And tell us the whole story. The first ever just money you made out of art, basically.
Sure. So I think the big one for me was I ended up working for a company called Robo Race, and so they're Formula One circuit car racing that uses completely electric cars, and I think. I don't know how much they've made in terms of the technology. So I also got to be kind of careful. I don't want to, there was still a lot of blue sky stuff still, but I was helping visualize some stuff around that. So RoboRace does exist now. It has done races. I believe Daniel Simon was the designer of that car, which is huge. They were sponsored by Michelin. So I think they were trying to build a Formula One kind of circuit around electric cars. I'm pretty sure is public, so it's fine. But I was working for them for a little while, so that was kind of the first. Hey, this is a real company that's actually giving me money. Now, it wasn't a lot of money, and I definitely was a junior, so I didn't have any bargaining power on the rates. But that was the big experience for me. That was kind of right around, I don't know, maybe 19. When I started that. Before then, I was doing some, freelance stuff for board games or whatever. But that was the first one where I was like, oh, this is a real company. They're actually willing to give me money. There's like a full on, I got to fill out some tax forms. I got to do all that stuff. So that was the big one for me, and it was fun. It was really great. I'm very grateful that I've had a lot of people, I think, give me some good opportunities in my career so far. And so I've been very lucky that way to have someone say, hey, what about this project? You got a month, you got 2 weeks to work on this. And I've always tried my best to say, yeah, of course, anytime,
Yeah, I just Googled it and it seemed awesome. And of course, I'm going to add Robo Racer pictures,
Yeah, of course.
As much as possible. And the reel as well, Robo Race.
It's super cool.
Yeah.
I was a huge fan. When I got that, it was super cool.
Yeah, I even saw some of Daniel Simon's concept works on it, which is super amazing. And here's the thing. Speaking of some of the artists and Daniel Simon's and stuff like that, I was wondering, who are some of your favorite artists and designers that have inspired you the most?
So in the industry, I would say my favorite artist is Paul Chadisson. He does a lot of those big, obviously he does a lot of those big mega city stuff, and I think he's doing spaceships now. But I've just loved his rendering work and some of his designs. So I think that was a huge one for me. Maciej Kuciara, Ghost in the Shell was a big one for me as well. I really love that work that he did on that. Ash Thorpe is another one that I'm a huge fan of. I love his cinematography. And then I would say the last one is Friendly Robot. I don't know if you know who that guy is, but amazing work. Also collaborates with Ash Thorpe quite a lot. So those are the four guys I would say in the industry. But I'm a huge fan of Renaissance and Russian landscape painters from like the 1800s. You know, Ivan Shishkin, for example, is probably my favorite artist. So I actually get a lot of inspiration from oil painters. I just find that you can't. I try not to look too much into concept art, because then it starts to get into a weird feedback loop where you're only using concept art for reference and inspiration, and then it starts to kind of look all the same. And I don't want to look like Paul Chatisson or Macheku Chiara. I want to have my own kind of twist on things. So I try to get inspired by other artists outside of the industry as much as I can. But I mean, in terms of quality work, yeah, those guys are insane. They're so good.
Yeah, exactly. And what do you think about, like, you know, how basically the niche in NFTs from beginning till now has been 3D work? And also, like, I know it's a whole, like, a pack of forms that I don't want to get into open. But here's the thing, like, you know, I'm just going to say something, you know, to anyone who's listening. It might be even interesting to you. But not just in NFTs, like in everything. I think 3D is one of those areas that has a super bright future, and there's going to be like
for sure,
gazillion amount of like opportunities for you, like if you're actually good at it and specifically get niche without it. And it could be, you know, like even in terms of art, like a lot of people are gravitating towards, like, you know, 3D stuff, which is, I think, kind of the whole buzz about, like, you know, meta and all this, which of course, like, I mean, yeah, as I said, it's like a whole just another subject, but I'm basically not, I don't really see any benefit to, for example, using meta. Maybe I sound like a boomer by saying that, but I really don't see any, like, you know, particular advantage to it. Like, you know, what do you think? Because let's say you can have meetings, you can live in a virtual world. Well, have you heard about World of Warcraft? That's basically the whole premise of meta. And not just that, you could literally use a Skype. Why try to make, like, there's a saying in Farsi and Iranian, basically, it's an expression. It's called, I'm just going to say it, then translate it. لقمه رو دور سر خود چرخوندن. لقمه means like a piece of sandwich, for example, or a piece of food. And when you twist a piece of food around your head, it's basically saying, like, you know, you could just eat it directly. Why do you do this shit?
I got it.
Yeah. You know, that's it, basically the gist of it. And what do you think about that?
Well, listen, you know, anything that's, I think NFTs has a use. I think that there's a cult following right now where basically you have to basically give all your money and say, like, yeah, no, this is 100% the future, and like everything about this is great. And,
to the moon.
I don't like that. I think that that's not necessarily the healthy way to look at this. I think that there's a use case that comes out of this. I think it's reminiscent of you know, the .com boom, where, hey man, websites, bro, websites are the future. Like, no, who cares what the website is? You have to have one, and it's and that's valuable. And it's like, maybe, you know, I think that there's going to be some projects that really do have value. I think NFTs for fine art, like auctions, you know, and verification of ownership, like that has a value. I think that the technology for other things has a lot of value. You know, some of these PFP projects, you know, where it's like 5,000 of these generated art things, like, I don't know, maybe that has a lot of value down the line, but I'm skeptical of it, but I'm cautiously optimistic. I think it could be interesting. I think anybody who's made some money in this, especially if they're artists and they're not like a company, hey, great, man, you've found a way to make millions of dollars or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like, solid. I can't bash somebody for selling their artwork in any way. But, you know, I look at this like, I don't know enough about the industry. I'm not a Web3 programmer. I don't have any skills in that. So I don't invest and I don't go deep into what I don't understand fully. So I understand gaming and I understand what I'm doing. I'd rather just spend my time and my efforts like making stuff that contributes to that. So it's one of those things, everybody has an opinion on this, but I don't know. I feel like not enough people actually understand the technology and have had a chance to sit down and break down like the future of the stuff enough. You know, if you look at Vitalik Buterin, for example, like the guy who made Ethereum, I don't think even he understands what NFTs are supposed to be. As far as I understand, I mean, don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure I listened to a podcast of him talk about this, and he was like, I don't even know what some of this stuff is, you know? So I just think that is it really the value of the art that people are excited about, or is it the fact that it's making money right now? You know what I mean? And I think the fact that it's blowing up or whatever, oh, my NFTs, increase in value 2,000%, and like that's signaling that there's going to be a future in this. It's like, are you chasing the hype and the money, or are you actually interested in the artwork? And so if it's the artwork, then fine, that's great. But if it's the money part, I think that will not last. It can't.
Yeah, 100%. And you see this type of stuff. Like, majority is unfortunately, because of course, it's because of money. Like, majority, let's be real. And the way you could see that, like, for example, in Twitter Spaces or Discord, it's like a super positive, toxic positive. Positivity. That's different. It's not necessarily like toxic. There we have toxic negativity and also toxic positivity. It's a super toxic positive. Wow, we're a big family and NFT community, bros. Look at my link. This type of stuff. Like, they shield their stuff all the time, like shamelessly, and they say it's because we love the NFTs, but you wouldn't love NFTs if they didn't make any money. A lot of them probably sell. A lot of them, like I would say personally, that all right, a lot of shit art got sold for this much money. Then maybe we should replicate shit art in hope of getting money. And that's just kind of sad that artists have to resort to this stuff, to actually make some income. But yeah, as even let's say even in 90s, in the foreign art scene, let's say in UK, I heard it from another guest of mine actually. I don't remember his name. I don't know who he or she was. I'm sorry, but he said something interesting. He said even in the 90s, in, for example, the UK, the art scene was literally what it is now in the NFT scene. It's all about mostly connections and which collector and there's a lot of art dealers in between. Like art dealers, there are people who just invest in art and try to sell it to someone else. It happens all the time in fine art, and it's the same thing with the NFTs. Right now, BPL's works are all like someone bought a BPL, I think, NFT for $1,500 like a year ago. Then it shot up to like $150,000 or something because it got so in demand.
That's so speculative, man.
Yeah, and like, what sets the narrative is because 7-8 years ago, like 9 years ago, a decade ago, when Ethereum with Bitcoin were at the early stages, a lot of people bought them. And, they thought it was cool. Yeah, someone ordered pizza with 5,700,000 Bitcoins. And those people that got rich off cryptos are the main collectors of NFTs right now. And those collectors are setting the culture of, that sort of stuff. But, yeah, I think that's about it. Do you have any other, thoughts on that?
Well, let's not forget, I think Bitcoin was mainly a currency for drugs and guns for a while on the dark web. So
it still is.
I remember hearing about that stuff when I was a kid, when I was younger, not a kid, but younger. And it's just funny because it's gone full circle where my little cousin now owns Bitcoin, and I'm just like, man, what a weird world, So I don't know. I look at it like, hey, let's see. Hey man, if it actually does help artists and it democratizes some stuff and it allows new players to kind of emerge and add real value to a community, then great. That's great. I'm not so sure that this is the way it's going to happen, but it might. And if it does, then great. So we'll just kind of wait and see. And once all the hype dies down and the real market is kind of established, then we'll see what happens. But I think if you look at history, there's no use chasing a hype. There's no use chasing hype. You might as well just find actual value and then just stick with it. And then over time, whatever that is, it'll make enough money and it'll have enough of a following where it doesn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in general it's a slippery slope because, yeah, it has a lot of good sides, but it has a lot of bad sides as well. But the fact that I hope the hype dies soon. That's, the only people that saying it are the ones that are like trying their best to, put some sort of value out in the world.
Sure.
And, for a lot of artists who live in, for example, maybe for United States and, first world countries, it doesn't count much. But when you, for example, sell a piece for, let's say, 1/10 of an Ethereum, for example, that money
No, I get it. It's a big deal.
dollars, for example, in countries like Iran, which actually surprisingly, there's a lot of main players in the NFT scene are a lot of Iranians. I always thought it's because, of course, I'm Iranian. The algorithm, the Instagram and Twitter are feeding me Iranian people. But then I realized, wait, no, it's actually not it. There's weird. It's like a weird like subculture thing that you kind of find out later. That holy shit, there's a lot of. But for example, that type of money is super valuable in the countries like that, and I think that's one of the good ways. And not just that, even sending money from like one country to another country, like the gas fees. Of course, it depends on the gas fee of the blockchain, but in general, it's much more affordable to use. For example, something like there was a service, Western Union, for example, that a lot of people use, but because we don't have PayPal is like sanctioned here. Because of the sanctions, we don't have PayPal or any other stuff. So it's really hard. And
who knows, man? I mean, it could be great though. Like I said,
And well, I mean, let's break off from the art stuff for now, and I just want to ask you this: aside from art and basically art, is there any other particular subject or thing that you're really into and would probably spend a lot more time once you, for example, got tired of art? Not tired of art, but just if you want to experience and explore something new.
I mean, look, I'm starting to try to branch into building, like Chido, for example, is like somewhere where I'd really like to focus some of my time. So getting more into the business side would be fun. I think if I end up doing that in some way in my life where I transition from being an artist full time to more of a business creative, then I could use kind of art as more of a hobby now, right? So if I could just make personal work kind of when I want and rely on other ways to make money professionally, then I think art would still remain kind of a hobby forever. But I have this kind of weird romance about owning like a sub store or something, or like an Italian sandwich shop, a little cafe could be kind of nice. I feel like if I'm 80 years old and not completely decrepit, or my mind's not completely gone, I would be one of those neighborhood guys. I could buy a tracksuit and just kind of eat cannoli and sip espresso and talk to people that way. But in terms of hobbies that I do now, I mean, I love learning about history and reading. I'm huge into psychology and philosophy. So anything involving that and trying to get a deeper understanding of a topic, it excites me. To be honest with you, hobby wise, I don't really have time anymore. In terms of workload, dude, it's probably, clearing 80 hours a week, every week of work, whether it's freelance, whether it's Eidos stuff, whether it's Chido stuff or whatever. There's a lot of time. So after 80 hours, your brain doesn't really have time to absorb new anything. So you're feeding yourself, you're hitting the gym, and you're sleeping and maybe you're reading a bit, but that's it.
Damn, that sounds productive as fuck. Nice.
I try to be, man. I don't know. Like maybe it lasts for 5 years and I completely burn out, but I love it so far, and I've always just kind of been that guy. So I think the next hobby I get into will be something I try to make money off of in some way. I could never just casually do something and just that's it. Like if I was to do a restaurant, for example, or like a cafe, I would try to be the owner. I would try to make a business out of it and try to make it successful. I don't think I could just own a cafe and like, whatever happens, I'll just make sandwiches. I'd be too psycho about it. So that's just my nature. Yeah,
it's like treating it as like a video game, like those, for example, like cafe management game.
I'm trying to level up. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm a collector. I'm a collector of game collectibles, man. That's what I am. I'm trying to get all the WoW armor, all the unique armor sets or whatever.
Achievements, Xbox 360 achievements, those type of stuff.
That's absolutely, man. That's all I can do. So that's my hobby is achieving, getting achievements.
Yeah, that's actually such a good mindset to look at your chores, in that regards. And I also try to do that as well, like since I was a kid. But right now I'm kind of putting my younger self to shame right now, by not sarcastic, like actually I've become much more lazy than when I was younger. But yeah, I'm trying to work on that as well. And actually, yeah, the thing about like gamifying your tasks and works is actually super helpful if you're the type of person that has that sort of video game playing mentality, And well, we've reached the final section and question of the podcast, which is called Final Words. All right, let me explain.
Final words.
Yeah, it kind of sounds dramatic. I know. I probably should change the name.
Last words. Last words before the end.
Yeah. Jesus. And all right, so in the limited amount of time that we have right now, let's say, as a person yourself, if you could say as a human to another human being anything that you want, and it doesn't have to be about art, just anything. And that's other human being is anyone who's listening to this podcast at any point in the future. Right now, today is March 1st. The time, and right now it's 7:29 p.m. Istanbul time, and it's probably 11:30 or 10:30 or 11 a.m. in Montreal. Yeah, 11:30 in Montreal right now, a.m. And we're recording right now. So any person who you're trying to communicate is anyone who's going to listen to this podcast at any point in the future, and they have reached the 1 hour and 14 minute and 53 second mark. What do you have to say to them?
Two things, maybe, if I can do two, kind of fold it in. So do something useful for somebody else. Build something useful, do something useful, be of use to somebody, and you'll be happy, and they'll be happy. So if you're going to have a career, just build off of that. Try to look for value that you can give somebody else, and something good will come of that. And try to live your life by looking for use and being of use to somebody or to something. And the second thing is, creativity saves the world, man. Art is like one of the only things that I think is genuinely worth living for. And that sounds really dramatic, and like I'm not trying to bolster my career as an artist and say that I'm more important than I am, but I think it's important to look at art as like one of the ultimate forms of human expression. We create things. Everything has art in it, right? Otherwise, we would just live in boxes, and even typography would all be the same. So everything that influences aesthetic is art, and it's so ingrained in human beings that I think we tend to forget about how important art is in our lives to make it interesting, and we aspire for aesthetic and creative excellence. And so in some way, I would say try to incorporate art in your life in some way, and enjoy that you're able to do that, because I think we've gotten to a point in humanity pretty much around the world where there's an opportunity to do that. And I think it's one of those things that's deeply fulfilling, and a necessary part of human existence is to experience that and to live it. So do your best to do that and enjoy its beauty, and then be of use.
See, this is why I really love adding this question to my repertoire of questions, because I always get to like really this sort of insightful, genuine answers. And for example, another podcast that I see that has this sort of thing is Lex Friedman podcast. He also has this sort of like, this type of questions, which I think is super important. But speaking of, everything you said, one of my kind of like nightmares is if one day I go blind. And of course, I don't want to go too dark, but I was wondering, like, if I go blind, like, would I, as someone who experienced art and, visual art and the beauty of it, like, how could I enjoy life then? But of course, there are a lot of, like, amazing blind people. Like, one of them is a page called ASF Vision. Like, he's such a positive, awesome dude. Like, he's blind, but he always skateboards, and he does these cool tricks, and he's amazing. Like, he kind of gave me a lot of like hope that going blind is not the end of things. And fun story, like when I was 10 I nearly got blind. Long story, I'm not gonna get into it, but it's what I'm trying to say right now is try to appreciate the gift of sight that you have. All right, it's getting kind of dramatic or something, but seriously, like, try to appreciate it. Like, if you're not colorblind, like, try to appreciate every single ounce of it, because it's such an awesome gift, honestly.
Yeah, and if it's gone, if one day someone loses it, I mean, I guess just be thankful that you can still taste and touch and hear. There's I think there's always a positive spin. If you're looking at the life as like, oh, yes, but it still sucks, or yes, but I don't have this anymore. That's kind of a depressing way to see things. Like, why wouldn't you be like, hey, but look at the bright side, even though it's horrific. It would suck. I would not want to be blind. I make art professionally. If I couldn't look at my own work, it would not be very good for my career or for my personal health. But, I think I'd rather just live life where I'm like, hey, but you know what, though? At least I can hear birds, or like, at least I can still listen to music. That's exciting for me. So you find a new way to be of value, right? Maybe it's not art, but maybe it's your podcasting. I mean, you could do that without eyesight, I guess.
Yeah, I guess you could. Yeah, definitely.
So it's not like, you don't want to be blind. Nobody wants to be blind, but like, at least you have that. You know what I'm saying? At least you could provide value to somebody else in some other way.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, fun thing that you mentioned that the guy that I mentioned has a podcast himself. His other co-host is another blind guy, and he even made a video about like how he set up his podcasting as a blind guy, and it was really interesting. And yeah,
see what I'm saying, man?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. I'll put his page probably in the caption. Yeah, for anyone who's wondering. And well, thank you so much for coming by. It was a real fun talk. And thank you to anyone who tuned in and listened to this episode as well, whether on YouTube or audio version. As always, if there's any suggestions or comments, leave them down in the comment section down below, whether on Castbox or YouTube or on Instagram. Or you can send me a DM on the Kouryer podcast page on Instagram. I'll always check all the messages. And with that being said, I hope you all enjoyed this new format. I try to lessen the amount of guests I have on a podcast, so I can work on the quality more, which I think in the end, in the long run, is I think the best thing to do. I hope you're enjoying this new direction as well. And with that being said, take care everyone. I hope you're all having a good weekend today, and the next episode. Bye.
See yous.